Hello, it's your last week. Woohoo! This week we're talking about chapter four. It's sort of a wrap-up chapter. I actually just sort of toss this in at the end because sometimes we have time for it and sometimes we don't. So, lucky you, we do have time for it. This week for your weekly assignment, I am going to have you turn in your reading guide again for me. There was some people on the feedback that said that that was a nice assignment to do because it helped them to make sure that they completed it. So, anyways, as always on hybrid, you've got different things to do, but this week you're going to turn in your reading guide. But you may have already known that. So I'm going to just quickly go over the PowerPoint for those of you that like to hear me talk about it. So this chapter is all about working with parents and families, especially siblings of children with disabilities, because first of all, as every child with a disability is very unique, every parent and family of the child is also very unique. So keep in mind. They're not all the same. They all have different preferences. There's different ways to have discussions with everybody, but this just sort of gives you some ideas to think about. So we're going to talk about how we have to sort of change our views on them, some effects of a child with disability and how it impacts the family, and then best ways for families to be involved in the treatment and the education. So it's really important that we consider the concerns of the parents and the family. So a lot of the times when we have a child coming to our classroom that might have a disability, we already are sort of not quite sure exactly how the year is going to go. We're aware of some of the needs that the child has, but just as nervous as we are, the parents are equally as nervous. And so it's just always important to know that they always want the best for their child. And even though they might come off overbearing or judgmental or something like that, just know that they are just trying to do the best for their child. So I always say it's better to be proactive, try to let them also know that you want what's best for their child. So, send an email, have a meeting, have a phone conversation, allow them to have a voice. So just simply say like, hey, what are you looking forward to? What are some of your concerns? What are some of your suggestions? And even if you utilize those suggestions or not, if you let them tell you, then they think that you're listening and they think that you care. So just always remember that it's great to let the parents have a voice. Remember that it is a two-way street. So as much as you want the parents to share, the parents want you to share with them as well. So especially if they have a child that is nonverbal, and that child comes home from school and they're not going to tell their parent how their day is. And so being proactive in that way too is important. So make sure conversations go both ways. Both you want to hear from the parents and they want to hear from you. Most parents are able to adapt their conversations to maximize positive development, and so they're really good at reading teachers. Like some teachers love to just come on in, let's have a conversation, and other teachers prefer to reach out by email. Parents are just happy to have a voice, so they'll learn which way you prefer, and they will utilize that. Trust me, if they think you like email, you'll have 25,000 emails a day. Not really, but you never know. Um, but a healthy parent-child relationship is beneficial. So it's not up to us to analyze their relationship, but just trust that they are doing the best that they can do at home. But parents are legally involved in the IFSP. So the IFSP is a individual family service plan, and that is a plan that allows the family to have a role in the interventions. That's what I was looking for. Interventions for the kids. So when a parent finds out that their child has a disability, there's lots of different stages of feelings. And so your book sort of goes over this in more depth. But there's an adjustment period. So sometimes they find out early on, like let's say your child's born with Down syndrome. You might find out when you're pregnant that your child has Down syndrome. There's other things though that come along when your child's not developing as well as they should be, or it might not even be till the school age where they find out their child has a disability like reading or something like that. And there's just different stages of feelings, and you just have to recognize that. I mean, just like in life, when something happens or you get a bad grade, you go through those feelings of uncertainty, and then ultimately you get past it and you say, okay, what can I do to bring my grade up? How can I be successful? Something like that. So a parent's going to think that same thing. They're going to get some news that they didn't expect. They're not sure how that's going to impact their future. And so they sort of just go through some different stages. And so the book talks about it more in depth, but just know that that there is going to be a little bit of an emotional time for them. So a lot of parents go through guilt, or they feel responsible for something happening. They get very vulnerable, so that sometimes they don't want people to know, or if somebody says something about their child, they get real defensive. Sometimes then they also have a hard time dealing with the way that their child is reacting at home. Sometimes they can negatively get defensive to their extended family members. Other times they go out to their extended family members and ask them for that additional support. So it just really depends. It is a stressful situation. And mothers typically are vulnerable to depression, but it doesn't mean that they all go through that. Actually, it says here 71% are not depressed. So don't think because you have a child with disability, you're automatically depressed, because that is not the case. But there are some that do deal with depression. Oh, look, I forgot to move that little guy up. So a lot of times we learn from our negative experiences. We look for positive influences. We take advantage. These are resilient families that find out and they are successful and they move forward in a positive way. They take advantages of the supports that are offered. They balance the needs of the child with the needs of the family. They establish routines, provide structure, and they advocate for their child. So they find a healthy way to help their family deal with this. Sort of like I said, you get a bad grade and you're like, that's okay. Look, I have to look at the rest of the syllabus. What are the rest of the assignments? I need to make sure that I do these well. But it's not like you're going to forget your other classes and fail your other classes. Just like you're not going to forget about your other kids. You're going to try to find balance. While you might have to give some extra attention to this class to make sure you pass it, it doesn't mean that you're giving up on your other classes. You're just being more cognizant about your approach to success, your path to success. And so you've got to think about that sort of in relation to if you're a parent that found this out. Parents aren't the only ones that have that are impacted by a child with a disability. Siblings are also very, I don't know what you would say, influenced by somebody with a disability. So if they have a brother or sister, an older or younger, either way, typically it also does make a difference for their siblings. So they might also have some emotions or reactions. So sometimes the parents, because they are maybe more stressed or they're worried, or that impacts the kids and the siblings. They might at first have more difficulty coping with the idea. They might not really understand why their brother or sister has more appointments, or why are these therapists coming over? Why is my mom on the phone all the time? Or why is this child getting more attention than I am? Then they sometimes wonder about what caused it and could it happen to them? And then some other things are like, well, what are people going to think about my brother or sister? So they wonder about others. They wonder about what's going to happen in the future. And it really just depends on a lot of things, like, what time, at what point was the child diagnosed? And so if they weren't diagnosed till later, it might not have, it may have more of an impact, or maybe even less of an impact than if the child was born with it and they've always known that child is having, or their brother or sister is having a disability. So there's lots of things that can impact it. It could be at the time of diagnosis, it could be their birth order, it could be the difference in gender, like girls are worriers where boys don't worry as much, just things like that. So there's lots of different things, but just know that if you have a sibling of a child with a disability, they could very well have some social or emotional things that are coming along with just being the sibling of a child with a disability as well, even though they don't have some even though they don't have one. And so it's just important to have knowledge of these different emotional reactions that could happen. Oh, goodness, sorry. And have access to information to help support them. There is a family-centered approach to treatment, and so when a child is diagnosed early, they are given an individual family service plan, an IFSP, and it's a very family-centered. Like, how is everybody going to work together to help this child? So the professionals come in, or the therapists come in, and they work for the family. And the parents are partners. They develop the program. They assume control. So they're not dependent upon one speech teacher to help that child. The speech therapist might help the family understand strategies they can use at home. But a lot of the times, the therapist works with the mom so that the mom can then work with the child all the time. And that way, you're not dependent on just the therapist. Um, there's a strong balance between offering assistance and then encouraging their independent decisions, and it's consistent with wraparound services. So early intervention usually talks about an individual family service plan, and then in school they talk about wraparound services, which means at school we offer the educational supports, but then we're also going to make sure that at home or in the community you have other supports that you can utilize. Oh, I went backwards. So we look at the family characteristics, the size, the cultural background, their socioeconomic status, the way that they cope with various things, and then we look at the family because all families are really built very differently and they rely upon each other very differently. So is it a very cohesive family, and what are some of the strategies we can use? And then what's their adaptability? So are they ready to be like, yep, I'll do whatever you say? Or are they more like, no, that's going to mess up our routine. That's not going to work for us. And so you have to be thoughtful in the way that you're creating your plan for each family. We want to look at the functions, so we want to also make sure that we're supporting them economically in the daily care and the social skills. Do they have the right medical insurance they need? Is there other medical insurance we need to help them apply for? And then the educational uh, standpoint, and that's where you come in. How can we work with the teachers to make sure that this child's getting what they need? And then the chapter also talks about family life cycle, and so the stages and transitions between each stage. So early childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, and then guardianship. And so you'll want to go back to your text and sort of review what those different stages are and how we transition between each of the stages. Another one is looking at the social support. So are there groups within the community that the parents or the families can be a part of? Are there parent centers? So like Kentucky has the Kentucky Spin, which is a parent-centered organization for resources, and then helping them be able to find valid and reliable online resources is really helpful. We've already talked about functional behavior assessment in this semester, but it comes back up in this chapter. Just if a child needs it, we help create a positive behavior system utilizing the functional behavior assessment. So we look at the assessment to figure out what behaviors we need to work on, and then we create a behavior plan in a positive way to help support that, and we include the family in that behavior system to make sure that everybody's working together for the best of that child. We keep the communication open, so there's different ways to communicate. Traditionally, schools do parent-teacher conferences, but there's other options. So there's the home note program and a traveling notebook. I used to use a traveling notebook a lot, and actually for a while, for one of my students, we had like a recorder. It was like a traveling recorder because it was just easier for the mom and I to just talk back and forth on the recorder, and we would send it back and forth with the child who was nonverbal. But I want you to review each of those because they're great options not just for our children with disabilities, but any child that you're having some issues with. You can utilize these communication tools that might help you be successful. And then parent advocacy is huge. So parents are really strong with helping to make sure that they're getting the best for their child. And if they're not, there's a process called due process, which is sort of like the step before suing. So that was a very quick overview of the chapter. This chapter is not super in-depth, but it just sort of goes over some ideas to keep in mind about the fact that having a disability does impact the family, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that we can support them and be a positive environment for them and a relationship that they know that we're all working together for the best of their child. So anyways, it's been great this semester. Keep me posted if you have any questions, and good luck on finals.